We all kind of instinctively believe empathy is a moral superpower, yeah. That feeling of truly connecting.
Totally. It feels inherently good.
Seeing the world through someone else's eyes, I mean, it feels like it has to be a force for good.
Right. And you see it playing out like after major tragedies.
Yeah, think back to Sandy Hook. I remember the news, just gut-wrenching. And then the details. 20 young kids, 6 adults, massacred.
Horrific. And the emotional reaction was, well, immense. Bloom himself talks about his own son.
Weeping, wearing a bracelet for months.
Exactly. And even President Obama choked up and, nobody thought that was fake or calculated.
No, it felt real. So this capacity, this feeling what others feel, we see it as this amazing gift.
A powerful force for good, absolutely. That's the common view.
And here's the twist we're diving into today. What if that powerful feeling, that feeling what others feel, isn't always leading us down the right path morally?
Precisely. That's the core of Paul Bloom's radical argument against what he calls emotional empathy.
From his book, yeah, Against Empathy, the case for rational compassion. It's pretty provocative stuff.
It really is. It's a thesis that honestly shocks people because it cuts against such a deeply held belief.
Because when you hear, I am against empathy, you immediately think...
You think, I'm against caring, or I'm selfish, or something like that.
Right. Or just cold-hearted.
But his point is like the exact opposite. If we genuinely want to be effective in our caring, if we want a better, kinder world, we might actually need to rethink how much we rely on just feeling what others feel. In a way, we might be better off without that kind of empathy.
Okay, so this isn't about being a heartless monster then. It's actually about being more effectively good.
Exactly.
But the word empathy itself, I mean, it can mean different things to different people. How is Bloom defining it here, the specific type he's critiquing?
That's absolutely crucial to get straight first. Bloom is laser-focused on emotional empathy, that visceral act of feeling what you believe another person feels.
Like mirroring their emotion.
Right. Experiencing their suffering or their joy right alongside them. He is very, very clear. This is not the same as what people call cognitive empathy.
Which is more like understanding.
Exactly. Understanding what others think, their perspective, without necessarily mirroring their feelings. Cognitive empathy can be a tool for good, sure, but...
But it's also what, like, good manipulators use.
Precisely. Successful psychopaths, con artists, they often have high cognitive empathy. They can predict how you'll react because they understand your thoughts, but they don't feel your pain.
Got it. And he's also not against just general caring.
No, not at all. He's not against compassion or kindness. He defines those as more of a diffuse concern for others' well-being. Often comes with warmth, a motivation to help.
But without the intense mirroring.
Right. It's that specific emotional mirroring, the feeling what they feel part, that he argues is the problem.
Okay, so our deep dive today is really to unpack why. Why does he think this emotional mirroring, which feels so good and right, might actually be a flawed moral guide? And what's the alternative he's suggesting?
That's the mission.
Honestly, when I first bumped into Bloom's whole idea that empathy could be a poor moral guide, my first reaction was just, is this guy serious?
Yeah.
It's like being against kittens or something. It just feels so intuitively wrong, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Our gut feeling is that empathy is just good, an absolute good, something you can't have too much of.
Yeah, like more empathy equals more good in the world. Seems simple.
And charities know this, right? They're experts at using it. They hit you with those poignant images, those heartbreaking stories.
Bloom mentions getting a postcard, was it? Of an Indonesian child.
Yeah, exactly. Designed specifically to stir up empathy and get you to open your wallet. He even quotes a charity leader saying basically if she couldn't make people feel that empathy, her group would get less money.
And the kids they help might suffer or even die.
Right. It shows just how deeply ingrained that belief is. Emotional empathy is what drives good deeds.
So here's the big question then. If empathy is so motivating, if it really does stir us up to act, why on earth is Bloom arguing against it? It seems counterproductive.
Well, this is where his central metaphor comes in. He calls empathy a spotlight.
Okay, spotlight. It really sounds like a good thing, right? Shining a light on problems.
You'd think so. But Bloom argues that empathy's spotlight has some serious flaws. Its beam is surprisingly narrow, it's deeply biased, and it actually ends up obscuring the bigger moral picture. It comes with hidden costs.
How so? Biased in what way?
Well, first, empathy is biased, that spotlight. It shines brightest on people who are close to us, those who are similar to us, and those we see as more attractive or vulnerable and less scary.
Okay. Give me an example.
Think about Sandy Hook again, the tragedy we mentioned. The national outpouring of grief was, overwhelming.
Yeah, completely.
But Bloom points out, in that very same year, more school-aged children were murdered in Chicago. But where was the national outcry? Where were the warehouses full of toys for those kids?
That's a stark contrast.
Because empathy's spotlight shines brightest on those we see as like us. The kids in Newtown felt familiar, maybe like our own kids or neighbors. Teenage black kids in Chicago. For many, sadly, they don't trigger the same empathic response.
So it's biased towards similarity and maybe perceived vulnerability?
Exactly. And it's not just people. Why does one oil-drenched penguin sometimes get more attention and donations than, say, an ongoing famine affecting thousands?
Or the classic example of one missing person like Natalie Holloway.
Right. The immense focus on her case versus the genocide in Darfur happening around the same time, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives.
Wow. So his critique is basically that empathy can skew our moral judgment, almost like prejudice does?
That's his line. Empathy distorts our moral judgments in pretty much the same way that prejudice does. It directs our care unfairly.
Okay, that's bias. What else is wrong with the spotlight?
Second, empathy is enumerate. It just can't handle numbers.
Enumerate, meaning bad at math.
Sort of. The spotlight's beam is incredibly narrow. Bloom says you cannot empathize with more than one or two people at the same time. Try it. Try to genuinely feel the suffering of 10 people simultaneously. 100. 1,000,000.
Yeah, impossible. It just becomes an abstract idea. Annie Dillard said something like, see nothing to it about imagining 1 billion people in China.
Exactly. Empathy inherently favors the one over the many. There's a famous experiment by Daniel Batson.
The Sherry Summers one?
That's the one. They showed subjects this story of a 10-year-old girl, Sherry, terminally ill, on a waiting list for treatment. If you just ask people logically, they'd say, yeah, she has to wait her turn. There are others maybe more deserving ahead of her.
Right, seems fair. Tragically.
But when they specifically prompted subjects to empathize with Sherry, to really feel her situation,
They wanted to bump her up the list.
significantly more likely to move her to the front of the line, even knowing it meant other kids, potentially more deserving based on the criteria, would have to wait longer. Empathy literally overrode fairness.
That's the identifiable victim effect, isn't it? We care more about one named person than statistics.
Precisely. People will donate way more money for one specific child needing surgery than they would support, say, a small sales tax increase that could statistically prevent many more hospital deaths.
Stalin's grim quote comes to mind. One death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic.
It's bleak, but it captures how empathy works, and it has real-world consequences. Think about Sandy Hook again. Newtown was already quite affluent.
Right.
But the outpouring of empathy led to this inundation of charity. They ended up with vast warehouses crammed with plush toys, huge amounts of money pouring in from far poorer communities. It actually became a burden overwhelming them. The empathy, while well-intentioned, was poorly directed because it couldn't grasp the scale or the relative need.
Okay, so it's biased, it's bad with numbers. What's the third problem?
And third, empathy is short-sighted. The spotlight focuses intensely on the immediate glow, the suffering right now, often neglecting the long-term consequences.
Like what?
Take the whole debate around trigger warnings in universities. There's empathy, understandable empathy, for a student who might be genuinely traumatized by seeing a graphic image or reading a disturbing text.
Sure.
But focusing only on preventing that immediate distress can sometimes clash with the long-term academic values of intellectual challenge, exposure to difficult ideas, building resilience.
So the short-term feeling overrides the long-term goal.
Potentially. Or think about parenting. Good parenting often involves making your kid do something they hate in the short term. Eat vegetables, get a vaccine, do their homework because it's good for them later.
Right, you endure their short-term misery for their long-term well-being.
Exactly. An overly empathic parent might struggle with that. Or consider someone precisely. Empathy can feel good, it can make things better in the short term, but lead to tragic results in the future.
Wow. So if empathy is this biased, numerically challenged, short-sighted spotlight, constantly leading us astray, making things worse sometimes, what do we do? Just switch off our feelings, become like Moral robots.
Haha, no, not at all. That's not Bloom's solution. He argues for something different, something he calls rational compassion.
Rational compassion. Okay, how is that different from empathy?
The distinction is really key. Remember, empathy is feeling with someone mirroring their pain or joy. Compassion, as Bloom defines it, is feeling for them.
Feeling for it, like concern.
Yeah, it involves warmth, concern, and care, as well as a strong motivation to improve the other's well-being. But then this is crucial, it happens without necessarily taking on their suffering, without getting emotionally entangled in the same way.
So you can care, you can want to help, but you don't have to feel exactly what they feel.
Exactly. And there's even some neuroscience that backs this up. Tanya Singer did fascinating research with a Buddhist monk, Matthew Ricard,
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of him.
and some non-meditators. They trained people in both empathy and compassion. What they found was that empathy training lit up brain areas linked to empathic distress. It felt unpleasant, draining. Ricard himself called it intolerable, emotionally exhausting.
Sounds like burnout.
It leads to burnout. But the compassion training, that activated different areas, ones linked to positive feelings, reward, pro-social motivation. Ricard described that feeling as pleasant, energizing, invigorating.
So compassion fuels you, empathy drains you.
In a nutshell, yes. It suggests you can care deeply, be motivated to help, without getting swamped and burning out by mirroring the suffering.
That really does challenge the whole idea that to truly care, you have to feel their pain. It sounds like keeping a bit of distance might actually be more helpful, but where does the rational part come in? What's reason got to do with it?
Reason is absolutely paramount for Bloom. Conscious, deliberate thinking is what allows us to overcome empathy's biases. It lets us recognize that, say, the lives of those in faraway lands matter just as much as the lives of our children, even if our gut feelings or empathy pulls us much more strongly towards our own kids.
So reason provides the impartiality that empathy lacks.
Exactly. Adam Smith, the philosopher, talked about this. He didn't trust flimsy benevolence. He said, reason, principle, conscience. The great judge and arbiter of our conduct is a much stronger power. Reason also lets us think about those long-term consequences to figure out what actually helps the most, not just what feels good right now.
And this connects to that idea you mentioned, depersonalization.
Yeah.
Making ourselves less biased.
Yeah, Elaine Scarry's idea. Instead of trying to force ourselves to feel equally strongly about everyone, which is probably impossible,
Right.
we try to make ourselves less swayed by our immediate emotional reactions. Think about blind hiring, or how judges for awards often review submissions anonymously.
Stripping away names, photos, anything that might trigger a bias, reducing candidates to XYZ.
Exactly. It's a way to let reason, rather than gut feeling or unconscious bias, be the guide. It aims for fairness by neutralizing those immediate, often empathy-driven responses.
Okay, that makes sense intellectually, but how does this rational compassion actually look in practice? Is there a real-world example of this approach?
Yeah, a great example is the effective altruism movement, EA.
Ah, yes, EA. Combining heart and head, right?
That's their tagline.
Yeah.
EA is basically a social movement trying to put rational compassion into action. They use empirically informed decisions, data, evidence, to figure out which charities or interventions make the most difference.
So looking at cost effectiveness, scalability, stuff like that. Using sites like GiveWell.
Exactly. They're trying to maximize the good they do per dollar or per hour spent based on evidence, not just on which cause pulls hardest at the heartstrings.
Yeah.
Think of Zel Kravinsky, the guy who donated a kidney to a stranger. He explicitly puts his altruism in mathematical terms, weighing the risks and benefits rather than acting purely from an emotional surge.
That is incredibly rational and incredibly generous. But I can see how some people might find that approach a bit cold, clinical, maybe?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a common critique. It can feel detached. Bloom tells a story about a pastor who said she liked giving to beggars directly on the street
Why?
because it made her feel good. It felt like important human contact, even though she suspected some of the money might go to criminal organizations or feed addictions.
So the personal feeling was more important than the actual outcome.
For her, in that moment, yes. Bloom's response is pretty blunt. It depends on what you want. If your goal is the warm, fuzzy feeling of personal contact, fine. But if your goal is to actually save lives or make the biggest positive impact,
Then the numbers matter more than the feeling.
then arguably the niceties of personal contact are far less important than actually saving lives. It forces you to clarify your ultimate goal, feeling good or doing good.
Okay, let's circle back to something tricky. We often associate a lack of empathy with, well, psychopaths. If Bloom is arguing against empathy, Isn't he inadvertently sort of siding with psychopaths? Or suggesting they're doing morality right by not feeling?
Yeah, that's a really important objection to tackle. It's a common misunderstanding. Remember the distinction between cognitive and emotional empathy.
Right. Cognitive is understanding, emotional is feeling.
Psychopaths typically have high cognitive empathy. That's why they can be such skilled manipulators and con artists. They understand how people think and feel, which allows them to exploit weaknesses. But they have very low emotional empathy. They don't feel the pain they cause.
Okay.
But their nastiness, their cruelty, isn't really down to the lack of emotional empathy itself. It's more about other traits, like a lack of self-control and a malicious nature. Studies generally find a non-relation between empathy and aggression. Lacking emotional empathy doesn't automatically make you aggressive or cruel.
So it's not the lack of feeling, it's the malice.
And lack of impulse control, often. Contrast that with people on the autism spectrum, say with Asperger's. They often struggle with cognitive empathy, reading social cues, understanding perspectives, but they typically have normal or even high emotional empathy. And crucially, they show no propensity for exploitation and violence.
In fact, they're often more likely to be victims of cruelty.
Exactly. So they demonstrate quite clearly that lacking certain types of empathy doesn't make someone a bad person or a psychopath. It's much more complex than low empathy field.
Okay, that clears that up. But what about our closest relationships? Forget saving the world for a second. Surely, in families, friendships, partnerships, empathy is essential. When my friend is hurting, I want to show them I feel their pain, right? Isn't that connection vital?
That's a really fair point, and Bloom definitely acknowledges that empathy can be a huge source of pleasure and connection in intimate relationships. It's part of what makes friendship, love, even watching sports together, so rewarding.
Okay, so it's not all bad.
No, but he still cautions against too much emotional mirroring, even here. It can lead to what psychologists sometimes call unmitigated communion, where you're basically just suffering at the suffering of your loved ones.
Like you get dragged down with them.
Exactly. It becomes emotionally draining, and it can actually make you less effective at supporting them because you're overwhelmed yourself. Think about healthcare professionals. Bloom quotes a surgeon, Christine Montrose, who said she'd be completely incapacitated if she truly empathized with every grieving family member or felt her patient's physical pain during an operation. An ER doc described the burnout from trying to empathize with everyone at the World Trade Center site after 9/11.
They need some professional distance to function.
Right. And even in parenting, we talked about how making kids do hard things is necessary. Over-empathizing with their immediate unhappiness can lead to overly permissive parenting. Bloom calls it greedily focusing on the short-term buzz of increasing your children's happiness right now at the expense of their long-term good.
So even with loved ones, understanding, compassion, active support might be better than just mirroring their feelings.
Often, yes. Understanding compassion and maintaining some distance can be more effective and definitely more sustainable for the caregiver.
Taking this to an even bigger stage, politics, conflict, war, it sounds like empathy could be really dangerous there too, not just ineffective.
Absolutely. It can be a double-edged sword. Bloom argues that empathy is just as often the gas for conflict as it is the brakes.
How so? Gas.
Think about it. Intense empathy for your own group, for the suffering inflicted on your people, that can directly fuel anger toward those who are cruel to that individual or group.
Like in ethnic conflicts or nationalism.
Precisely. He points to conflicts like the Israeli-Palestinian one or many historical atrocities. The motivation often comes from deep empathic feelings about past wrongs done to one's own side, which then justifies aggression against the other side.
Leaders tap into that, don't they?
Absolutely. Support for war is rarely won through rational arguments with statistical assessments of costs and benefits. It's won by appealing to those deep feelings, that shared history of perceived victimhood, the empathy for crimes done in the past toward their families or compatriots or allies.
And it cuts across political divides, right? It's not like one party owns empathy.
Not at all. Bloom notes there's no party of empathy. Both liberals and conservatives use it. He cites Dick Cheney invoking empathy for 9/11 victims to justify torture. On the other hand, addressing huge abstract problems like climate change, often seen as a liberal concern, actually requires overcoming empathy's limitations.
No.
Because empathy naturally pulls us towards immediate, identifiable suffering, not abstract future threats to nameless, faceless people. Dealing with climate change requires abstract reasoning about long-term statistical risks, something empathy struggles with. It often favors doing nothing when the costs are immediate and the beneficiaries are distant or future generations.
And what about anger? That often comes with empathy for victims. Is anger a better guide?
Anger can be motivating, for sure. That righteous rage can fuel movements for justice. But, like empathy, it's also biased and prone to irrationality. It can feed off the suffering of others in an unhealthy way. Bloom suggests anger is a reliable and useful servant, but never a master. Use its energy, but don't let it dictate your actions uncritically.
Okay, so the constant refrain seems to be, rely on reason, on rational compassion. But let's be honest, humans aren't always paragons of rationality, are we? We're full of biases, we make dumb decisions.
Haha, absolutely. Bloom acknowledges our mathematical dunderheadedness. He uses the hilarious example of the A&W third-pounder burger failing because people thought a third of a pound was smaller than McDonald's quarter-pounder because 3 is less than 4.
Oh dear. That doesn't inspire confidence in rationality.
No, and cognitive biases are real and powerful. But Bloom's point is we also have the capacity to override, deflect, and overrule our passions. We can use reason. Think about the effective altruists again. They are often turned to altruists by numbers, by rational arguments about impact.
So reason can win sometimes.
And look at history. We've made huge moral progress. Think about rights for women, racial minorities, LGBTQ+ individuals. Bloom argues this progress wasn't primarily driven by people suddenly becoming more empathic. Our great-grandparents probably weren't less capable of empathy.
So what drove it?
He argues it was driven by reasoned argument, by the abstract appreciation that these other groups deserved equal rights and consideration, even if people didn't feel a strong empathic connection to them initially. Reason allowed us to expand our moral circle based on principle, not just feeling.
So pulling this all together, this deep dive into Paul Bloom's work really flips the script on empathy. The core idea is that emotional empathy, that feeling what others feel, despite its appeal, is actually a pretty flawed moral guide.
Yeah, because it's biased, it's terrible with numbers, and it's focused on the short term.
And the alternative he proposes is this rational compassion, caring, wanting to help, but guided by reason and focused on actual outcomes, not just mirroring feelings.
Exactly. A more reliable path to actually making the world better.
But just to be super clear, he's not saying empathy has no place, right?
No, absolutely not. He's careful to point that out. Empathy can be wonderful. It's an immense source of pleasure in art, in fiction, watching sports, in our personal lives. It amplifies the pleasures of friendship and community, of sex and romance.
So enjoy it, connect with people.
Yes, but put it in its proper place. Don't mistake it for your primary moral compass, especially when making decisions about fairness, resource allocation, or long-term consequences.
Okay, well, this conversation definitely leaves us, and hopefully you listening, with a pretty challenging thought to chew on. It touches on something Bloom raises, a question many find almost taboo.
Which is?
Basically, how should we divide our resources, our money and time and attention and emotional energy? He frames it almost like a formula. Self plus close people plus strangers, 100%. How much should go into each bucket?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's no easy answer.
No. But thinking about rational compassion forces you to confront it. So the question for you to ponder is, what might your formula look like? And maybe more broadly, what stands out to why you, about how these ideas, rational compassion over emotional empathy, might change the way you think about doing good in the world?